Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all? Today we are going to be doing consumer surplus. That's 2.5 topic out of our AS Economics 9708 syllabus. All right, in today's tutorial, we'll be looking at the definition of consumer surplus. We'll be talking about the significance of consumer surplus. We'll be looking at the changes in consumer surplus with respect to changes in price. And we are going to see the significance of price elasticity of demand in determining the extent of the changes. All right, so let's proceed. First, let's look at what do we mean by consumer surplus. By definition, consumer surplus refers to the difference between the price a consumer is willing to pay for a product and its market price. What do you mean? This means that the consumers are paying a price that is actually less than what they are willing to pay. Now you look at the demand curve. The vertical axis shows the price, the horizontal axis displays the quantity demanded. Now P is the market price and P1 is the price that the consumers are actually willing to pay. So what does this mean? This means that the consumers are willing to go to the extent to pay P1 for a particular product, although the market price is at P, which is considerably much lower than what they are willing to pay. This is the reason why this shaded region, which is actually the difference between what the consumers are willing to pay, that is P1, and what is actually the market price, which is P, this difference, this shaded region is the consumer surplus, which means the significance of this consumer surplus is that this is actually a measure of the additional benefit that the consumers are receiving. Why? Because they are paying less for something than what they were willing to pay. The consumers were willing to pay to go for paying as much as P1 for the product. However, the market price is P. So this shaded region is the additional benefit the consumers are receiving. All right. Now, this consumer surplus is frequently tested in your MCQs, and an easy rule of thumb to remember what actually is consumer surplus, a good way to recall is that this is actually the area under the demand curve and above the market price. And this is actually what the shaded region is telling you. You see, because when you look at P1 and when you look at P, so this is the market price. This is the market price, and P1 is the price which they're actually paying. So the area which is under the demand curve and which is above the market price, the shaded region. So a good way to remember is the area above the market price and under the demand curve. That is the consumer surplus. All right. Now, the question which arises is, what happens if there's a market price rises? If the market price increases, let's say from P to P2, what happens? As soon as the market price rises from P to P2, you see the quantity demanded is going to fall and there would be a loss in consumer surplus. The shaded region shows that there would be a loss in the consumer surplus. Why would there be a loss in the consumer surplus? Because less people are now prepared to pay higher prices. So there would be a loss in the consumer surplus. P1 is the maximum price the consumers are willing to pay. P is the initial market price and P2 is now the new market price. And why would there have been an increase in the market price? Because maybe, let's say, in situations where, let's say it's going to be a final match of cricket between India and Pakistan, and consumers are willing to pay any price to go for the ticket for that match, or they do not want to miss on the opportunity of attending a particular concert of their favorite singer. So there is an increase in the market price from P to P2. All right. Now let's look at a contrary scenario. On the flip side, what would actually happen if there is a fall in the market price? Now, if there's a fall in the market price, again, initial market price was P. Now the market price is P2. Now, why would there be a fall in the market price? Let's say the producer has introduced a special offer on its product and the price has now fallen from P to P2. So now when the price has fallen from P to P2, yes, exactly, there would be a rise in consumer surplus. You see, the first arrow which I have shown you in the diagram is showing you the initial consumer surplus. This was the initial triangle, the initial shaded region, remember, in the first diagram. That was the initial consumer surplus. Now, when the price has fallen below the market price, initial market price was P. Now, the new market price is P2. Now, when the market price has fallen from P to P2, there will be an increase in the quantity demanded from Q to Q2. The horizontal arrow on the horizontal axis, you can see there is an increase in the quantity demanded, and there has been a rise in the consumer surplus. Now the rise in the consumer surplus, you see, you need to be a little careful. Why? Because the rectangle area and the triangle area both are showing the increase in the consumer surplus. Now, the rectangular area of the consumer surplus is the increase in the consumer surplus for existing customers. This means now the fall in the market price is enabling the existing customers to buy more of that particular good. And the triangular region is showing the increase in the consumer surplus for new customers. This means that now, since the market price has fallen beyond the initial market price of P, more consumers are now willing to buy the product at the reduced price. So, in totality, the consumer surplus has risen by the triangular region and by the summation of the rectangular region. This total increase, the contribution is being made by the existing customers as well as by the new customers. All right. Now, the third thing which we are going to look under consumer surplus is, to what extent would a price change will be affecting the consumer surplus? The quantum of the price change, the size of the price change. The larger the change in the price would be, the greater would be the effect on the consumer surplus. Similarly, the lesser would be the change in the market price, the lesser would be the change in the consumer surplus. Another aspect is price elasticity of demand. This means the responsiveness of price to the demand of that particular product. Now, for the same increase in price, the fall in consumer surplus will be more if price elasticity of demand is elastic. This means if a particular product has an elastic demand and another product has an inelastic demand. If there has been, let's say, a same 10% increase or decrease in the price, the impact of the change in the price on the product that has an elastic demand would be relatively more as compared to the product that has an inelastic demand. In order to understand it fully, let's look at the diagrams. Now, look at the diagrams. Part A shows you an inelastic demand situation. The B part of the diagram shows you an elastic demand situation. So you can see in the first figure, the demand curve is steep. It is showing an inelastic demand. In the part B, the demand curve is relatively flatter, which is depicting the scenario of elastic demand. Now, what is happening? In both the situations, the market price has risen from P to P1. But if you look at the impact on the quantity demanded, in part A, where there is relatively inelastic demand, the effect of that same increase in price is relatively much lesser than the situation where the demand is relatively elastic. You can see in part B that the fall in quantity demanded is much larger than when the quantity demanded is inelastic. So this means that for the same increase in price, the loss in consumer surplus is greater. What can we conclude? that for the same increase in price, the loss in consumer surplus is greater when the demand is inelastic. And how can we show that? The shaded region is showing you that. The shaded region in both the scenarios is actually depicting what? The shaded region is depicting what? It is showing the loss in the consumer surplus. It's showing the loss in consumer surplus. So what is it? What can we conclude? We can conclude that when the demand is relatively elastic, for the same increase in price, the loss in consumer surplus would be greater than when the demand is elastic. The same increase in price, the loss in consumer surplus is greater when the demand is elastic. I hope this is clear. Stay tuned. We'll be coming up with more such videos. Happy learning.